Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning to all of our participants from throughout the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, and those of you tuning in from the Americas. Today, we are hosting in partnership with SIGA, which is the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, as part of their Sport Integrity Week. It's CANOC, the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committee, and the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee. So both organizations are proud, and we thank you for taking time to tune in to what is a very important topic: financial integrity and transparency. Both organization transformation, building trust, rebuilding trust, and credibility. Permit me now to invite to give remarks is the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, Ms. Diane Henderson.
Good morning, all, and thank you, Mr. Brian Lewis, for your introduction and opening remark. Good morning to all listeners. It is the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, TTOC's pleasure to be here today at the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, SIGA's Sport Integrity Week, and to host this financial integrity and transparency webinar. We are pleased that our speakers, inclusive of Mr. Keith Joseph CANOC President, Mr. Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros, SIGA Global CEO, as well as our Secretary General, Mrs. Annette Knott, is here with us today, as well as our panelists are able to join us and be with us today to make this a reality. Panelists being Ms. Edith and CFO of KA Raceway and Treasurer of CANOC, Turks and Caicos CGA, Mr. Dave Williams, Attorney at Law, Legal, Compliance and Operational Risk Consultant, Ms. Tanya Wiggins, Director, Barbados Olympic Committee and Executive Member of CANOC. As a National Olympic Committee member under the guidance of the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, and its basic universal principles of good governance within the Olympic movement, with growing issues impacting the efficiency in which we operate on a daily basis, it is our obligation to encourage all of our affiliates and stakeholders to follow these statutes with specific emphasis on financial transparency in all its forms. I thank Mr. Brian Lewis for his continued insight as we make it our business to continue the work ensuring that we not only adhere to, but spread the word and knowledge of financial integrity in sport. Thank you for listening in today and taking that step forward to improved financial transparency, and wishing SIGA all the very best in its Sport Integrity Week of activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Henderson. I now invite Mr. Keith Joseph, the president of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, CANOC, to give his remarks.
Thank you very much, Brian, and dear friends, panelists, other speakers. Protocol already having been established, let me, on behalf of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, CANOC, begin by acknowledging the work being undertaken by the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, SIGA, and the exciting engagement of Brian Lewis, who has climbed the ladder within that organization, having gone there wearing two hats initially at the time, that of President of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, and also that of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees. Today, we are observing the 6th day of the 4th edition of SIGA's annual Sports Integrity Week. The TTOC's engagement of CANOC to be part of today's proceedings is much appreciated, since both organizations joined SIGA at the same time, following discussions at the Hyatt Hotel in Trinidad and Tobago some years ago, with SIGA Global CEO Emmanuel Macedo de Medeiros and then President of CANOC, Steve Stout. Here we are today, and what a journey it has been. As sporting organizations, we are very much aware of the significant challenges that we have witnessed through decades in respect of sustaining integrity and transparency in sport. Transparency International insists that financial integrity describes the characteristics of a financial system that operates in a clean, transparent, and accountable way. All of us in sport should be very clear that our mandate as leaders and members must conform to this understanding. Importantly, however, in sport, we have also learned that we are engaged in one of the fastest growing industries in the international economy. And with this comes immeasurable challenges to maintain best practices attendant to financial integrity, pressed by the writers of the high-level report on financial integrity for sustainable development on international financial accountability, transparency, and integrity for achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda. The global financial system must be reformed, redesigned, and revitalized so that it conforms to 4 values: accountability, legitimacy, transparency, and fairness. The report further observed that, and we quote, policy shaping the global financial system and furthering financial integrity must be redesigned to adhere to those values mentioned: accountability, legitimacy, transparency, and fairness. Sport today is a business. There is ample evidence that sport is not exempt from the vagaries of corruption that we have unfortunately grown accustomed to reading and hearing about in the global economic environment. This is all the more reason for us to be forever vigilant in all aspects of our work, and why we are gathered here today in this week of activities, reviewing where we are in the application of the lofty values mentioned earlier. We must always be perceived as worthy of the confidence of our stakeholders, partners, collaborators, and sponsors. We must maintain the highest standards of financial integrity. For us in the Caribbean, let us be ever mindful that our small size leaves us no less vulnerable. Hence the invaluable importance of today's webinar. We will continue to seek new sponsors and sources of funding. We need these for our survival and for the fulfillment of our ambitions to meet the needs of those we attract to sport as a viable life option. We must steel ourselves. We must resist the temptation to sway from our mandate and commitment to it. The lessons of this week's profound webinars must be taken on board in shaping where we go from here. Congratulations to SIGA. Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee. Thanks and continued best wishes, Brian. Thanks all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, for your profound and powerful words thank you very much, Mr. Joseph, for your profound and powerful words. And folks, we will now go to the panel stage, and let me say some housekeeping rules at the onset. There is only so much we can do in the time allotted for us to stage this webinar as part of Sport Integrity Week. So the intention is to make it as interactive as possible and as conversational as possible. I will therefore encourage our participants, which has exceeded our original target, and thank you for your interest in financial integrity and transparency, to utilize the chat box, hopefully I've said it wrong, right, for submitting questions, even during the panel. And we'll now, before we get into the panel, thank you very much. I'm always open and transparent for submitting a note to me that I forgot the address of Mr. Emmanuel Medeiros, the CEO of SIGA Global. So we will now have the remarks and welcome from Mr. Medeiros, and then revert to the official program.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends from Trinidad and Tobago, dear friends from the Caribbean. Happy Sport Integrity Week to all of you. And what a week it has been. Real thought leadership, insightful, vibrant debates on sport's current state of affairs, as well as best practice, solutions, reforms to ensure that sport, the sport that we love, is governed with integrity, regulated with integrity, operated and played with integrity. So that sport, in summary, not only is placed at the podium, but is able to exert its invaluable social, economic, culture, and even economic role in today's society and global economy. Allow me to address my initial words to your president, Mrs. Diane Henderson, to thank her for making this important conference possible and putting financial integrity and transparency in sport right at the top of the agenda. Thanks also, Diane, for inspiring so many women and girls in your country, in your region, worldwide, who find in you the incentive, the encouragement, and the evidence that they too can pierce the gender glass ceiling, can make the difference, and can aspire to lead the way forward in dominant positions within the sporting industry. We have such a long way to go. A sport that continues to be dominated by men, a sport that only has 27.9% of women sitting in the executive committees of international sports federation, a sport that cannot remain locked in the past as if we were still in the 19th century. We are not. So we need to advance more, we need to move faster, and we need to ensure that sport is open, accessible to those who have the merits to fight for positions of leadership, because they too deserve to undertake the responsibility that sport entails. Allow me also a special word to my friend Keith Joseph, president of CANOC. I know Joseph for many, many years, and I can never forget his support and his encouragement, because Keith Joseph, is one of those who were side by side with SIGA right from inception, supporting SIGA, supporting our sport integrity agenda right from the very beginning. And I trust that we will continue to work and to shoulder to dignify sport, to advance sport, and to ensure that sport integrity is right at the top. Finally, a heartfelt word of appreciation to my brother, Brian Lewis, Trinidad Tobago Olympic Committee and CANOC immediate past president, and, important to stress, co-chair of the SIGA Committee on Gender, Race, Diversity, and Inclusion. Brian has been, as we all know it, a force of nature, a man of strong convictions, a man of noble causes, a man with an indomitable spirit to whom sport indeed owes a great deal. And SIGA too, as heading the great committee, he has held the torch, he has inspired, he has led, he has also touched sensitive nerves, and equally put on the agenda some sensitive topics, but decisive topics. He has been a friend, he has been a true champion on sport integrity. He has represented Trinidad Tobago and CANOC at the highest levels, and is someone that we at SIGA value and want to continue to have by our side, so that we can move forward on these important challenges and important agenda, so that we can have sport as we want, as we deserve, as we aspire to, a sport with integrity, free from corruption, free from money laundering, free from tax evasion and abuse, a sport free from discrimination. That is not just important, it is timely, it is urgent, and it is not something that we can continue to adjourn. A sport where all genders, all ethnicities, all nationalities, and people from every religion, every sexual orientation, every race, every social and cultural background can have their legitimate place, enjoy equal opportunities, and be respected. A sport, ladies and gentlemen, with values. A sport with future and for the future that can inspire the new generations too. Sport is indeed, as we all know it, a vital sector for social, culture, and economic development. And not just of Trinidad Tobago or my home island in the Azores, but the entire Caribbean region, the entire continent, and the world globally. We know the role that sport plays and the contribution that it renders to the promotion of health, education, tourism, even peace and solidarity among people. But sport is not immune. Sport is not immune to complex, increasingly sophisticated global problems, global threats, which often involve criminal organizations. Sport needs to uphold the principles of financial integrity and transparency in sport to preserve its essence and spirit. But sport also needs enhanced cooperation, enhanced dialogue. It needs also to look into global problems with global solutions, respecting the regional idiosyncrasies, the culture, the different natures of the challenges that we are involved. That is extremely important, because in order to tackle problems of this magnitude, we need a united front that can mobilize all dynamic sectors of our society. Governments, as they hold the mission to uphold the public interest, international organizations because they bring in the necessary indispensable coordination and common policies. We need, obviously, sport. Sports organizations are the custodians of these values. Their role is indeclinable. Their role is invaluable. And it must be exerted with the necessary autonomy and the necessary support. But sport, even if it had all the willingness in the world, is not equipped, does not have the jurisdiction nor the resources to tackle problems of public order. That is why we need this strong coalition of like-minded organizations and individuals to provide the response to these problems. And this is the first point I would like to make. The second point I want to make is that financial integrity and transparency in sport are important to enhance not just the trust and confidence of sport, but the economic and social impact that sport offers. Sport is such an important driver of economic growth and social inclusion in the Caribbean and all over the world. It generates wealth, it generates revenues from various sources. It improves infrastructure, it supports tourism development, it creates jobs, it creates a field of realization for so many. However, these benefits can be jeopardized by financial mismanagement, tax evasion, or money laundering that diverts the resources away from sport or the use of them for illicit purposes. This is a reality everywhere in the world, and sport is not immune to it. These activities not only reduce the potential of sport to contribute to public good, but also expose sport to legal risks and sanctions, as we have seen in the past, and we continue to see today. So we need to bear this in mind. The third and final point that I would like to make is that financial integrity and transparency in sport are necessary to strengthen the governance and cooperation of sport. Sport is a complex and dynamic sector that involves multiple actors and different interests at all levels. It requires effective governance structures and mechanisms to ensure accountability, to ensure participation, responsiveness, and coordination among all parties. However, these structures and mechanisms can be undermined by poor governance, poor regulations, lack of oversight, lack of scrutiny, which allow for conflicts of interest, abuse, or power or influence peddling. These problems not only erode the trust and legitimacy of sports authorities, but also hamper the collaboration and dialogue amongst sports stakeholders. Therefore, they need to promote financial integrity and transparency in sport as a means to improve the governance and cooperation of sport and restore, uphold, and safeguard the credibility of the whole ecosystem. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, one final thought. If we really want to achieve these goals, if we really want to work, play, or exert our professional activity in a sector that we are proud of, we need to be agents of change, each and every one of us. We need to do what it takes to ensure that this culture change is effective, to ensure a framework where everyone can have their place and they can contribute to move things forward. We need an holistic approach that involves all stakeholders, governments, sports organizations, law enforcement, civil society organizations, and of course the media too. The media has an important role to play. We need to implement policies and regulations that prevent and combat financial crimes in sport. And that means that we need to implement the SIGA universal standards and the SIGA rating and verification system, because they were designed to help sport, to support sport, to ensure that sport is governed under the highest standards and can fulfill its role in today's society and economy as a sector with dignity, a sector with respect, a sector that we can all feel comfortable of working in, playing, or investing. In this fourth edition of the Sport Integrity Week, I cannot thank you enough for giving a step forward, for raising the the flag of sport integrity, for mobilizing all stakeholders, for putting together such a relevant, such an important, such a motivating conference. I thank you for your support. I also thank you for the patience, as I spoke more than I wanted, but I speak from the heart, with no guidelines, with no preconceived thoughts, apart from those that are related with a full defense of the values that are all dear in society as well in sport. And those imply the discussions that you will be having here throughout the day with important guests, with influential organizations who have a leading role to play in the future and shaping sport in a way that can fulfill all these objectives. For all of you in Trinidad and Tobago, dear friends in sport integrity in the Caribbean, I thank you. You can count on me, as I know I can count on you. Thank you.
Remarks from Emmanuel Medero. So we now move straight in to the panel, and let me quickly introduce the panel. As I was saying, participants, feel free to use the chat to send your questions during the course of the panel. We'll try to pick it up and keep it as interactive as possible. So on this panel, we are proud to have Ms. Edith Cox, who is the treasurer of CANOC and the Turks and Caicos Commonwealth Games Association. But in the context of today's discussions, Ms. Cox is the Group Finance Director and HR Director and Chief Financial Officer of one of the largest, if not the largest, conglomerate in Turks and Caicos. She has also had vast experience, one being the first certified public accountant in Turks and Caicos. She has served on government audit committees, financial transparency and financial intelligence committees and audit committees in Turks and Caicos. And the environment in Turks and Caicos is very much oriented towards global finance. And therefore, Ms. Cox is very versed in the topic of financial integrity and transparency, and she will share a perspective. We also have Mr. Dave Williams, the attorney at law, legal compliance and operational risk consultant, and also trustee of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee. Mr. Williams understands the Olympic movement environment, the sport environment, but also he is a legal compliance specialist in terms of compliance law, financial intelligence, money laundering, etc. We also have Mr. Curtis Nero, the finance manager at the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, otherwise known as CARDI, which is based at the University of the West Indies here in St. Augustine, Trinidad. Mr. Nero is the current treasurer of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, served previously as the treasurer of the Trinidad and Tobago Rugby Football Union. But most importantly, he has an actual experience of cross-jurisdictional accounting, reporting, and the importance of financial transparency and integrity in terms of responding to not just government, but multilateral agencies. The other panelist is Ms. Itanya Wiggin, director on the Barbados Olympic Committee, an executive member of CANOC. More precise to this particular webinar, Ms. Wiggins is highly qualified in an area that most of us are afraid of, which is mathematics, arithmetic, counting, numbers, statistics. She also has vast experience in dealing with multilateral agencies, having been the project manager of programs such as AGANA and others, which have to report to some of the big names that talk very much about financial integrity and transparency. So without further ado, it's now 11:18 and the clock is ticking. We will open the panel, and I would like the panel individually to start with some brief thoughts, and then they could put their perspective further on the question, why financial integrity and transparency? What is it, and why is it important?
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, and good morning to our audience, our listeners out there. Thanks for tuning in, and I join Mr. Lewis with the number that I'm seeing is showing up. It just speaks volumes to the fact that people involved in sports want to have financial transparency and integrity in their organizations. So let me first say thank you to SIGA for dedicating a whole week to highlighting the importance of integrity in sports, and this forum, the TTOC and CANOC, for opening the conversation on good governance, including financial transparency and accountability. This is timely as circumstances have necessitated the requirement for more and better financial information. So I hope that at the end of this hour, you would have some takeaways which would be beneficial to the running of your organizations. So financial transparency. When I think of financial transparency, which is one of the hallmarks of good governance, I think of the concept where an organization makes available financial statements or other financial information, which gives clear, accurate, and complete account of an organization's financial performance. You can't have financial transparency without good governance. So that's a set of principles on which an organization is managed and structured, and that promotes good leadership, sound decision-making, and trust. So when we speak to financial integrity or financial transparency, we can't not think about accountability and integrity, financial controls, and trust. So I hope as part of this conversation, we will be able to delve more into financial transparency and what your organizations can do. I plan to speak about what CANOC has done, and then we'll take it from there. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and I hope that we are able to make some inroads into your accounting systems as it relates to financial transparency.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cox. I now invite Mr. Dave Williams. Financial integrity and transparency, what is it and why is it important?
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, and morning to everyone. And rather than being repetitious, because I think my colleague outlined in a lucid manner what financial integrity and transparency is all about. The question then is whether in Trinidad and Tobago and regional, there are appropriate laws to ensure this financial integrity and transparency. If we look at financial integrity to speak to a system whereby there would be honest dealings in financial affairs, comply with the relevant laws. Certainly ensure that there is financial integrity. There must be appropriate laws dealing with money laundering, terrorist financing, conflict of interest. The whole question of transparency, a quick definition in terms of it, transparency is about openness, is about being honest. It is about being able to disclose information so that the recipient can make an informed decision. The question then is, do we have laws that facilitate that in terms of government information? And I think that permeates throughout the region. There is the Freedom of Information Act, there is the Integrity in Public Life Act, there is the Prevention of Corruption Act, and I always indicate to participants that from a legal standpoint, whatever you are involved in, if you're dealing financial integrity and transparency, then all you need to do is to ensure that you have in place the relevant laws, because that's what compliance is about. Compliance is about you complying with the laws that deal specifically with the area in question. And if you're dealing with financial integrity and you're dealing with transparency, then you need to be familiar with the relevant laws that would allow for compliance in those areas. So I hope I have been able to, in a quick way, because there's a time constraint, to synopsize from a legal standpoint where we are relative to the topic today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams, and we'll keep it moving along. Mindful, as I said, keep showing your questions in the chat. Don't be shy. Mr. Nero.
Hey, good morning, everybody. The invitation to be here, colleagues would have, made the introduction and so on. Maybe at this time, I could probably focus a little bit, given that basically financial integrity and transparency was defined, then indicate probably some of the importance of having this type of situation within the particularly sporting organizations. I mean, in life and in all aspects of life, it pervades, but we're focusing here on what would be basically sporting organizations. And an important part of transparency and integrity really is the maintaining of trust. Sporting organizations rely on the support of fans, athletes, sponsors, governing bodies, and therefore financial integrity and transparency allows for the trust. And trust is very important in terms of getting buy-in and moving things along. It also facilitates fair competition, ensuring financial integrity prevents unfair practices like bribery and match fixing, which can undermine fairness and integrity of sport competitions. Attracting sponsors. Very important. Sponsors would like to know that have some assurance that their investment will be used ethically and effectively. And so the use of or being attractive from that point of view to sponsors would allow for accessing sponsorship and furthering the basically the goals of the various sporting organizations that you may have. And we can't forget really what a lot of us are working for really is the athletes. And the athletes really need to trust that their organizations are handling finances honestly and ethically, and therefore financial transparency can foster that trust. And Mr. Williams would have referred to as already as regulatory compliance, and that's a must. Whether we're talking about audits to verify what we would have done, funds, and because we would have sought funds from them through some sort of application. It allows for that kind of compliance with those regulations, and it's important because it then affords, again, even going back to trust. Sometimes you split these things up into various elements, but they're really all part of our overall whole, and just for convenience, we split them up, but really in terms of looking at aspects of transparency and accountability, it's really one subject, and it pervades through life as well, because it's difficult to separate what would be these aspects that we apply to the organizations without it affecting or being affected by how we actually live our lives. An important part of this really goes back to the human experience and who we choose to lead our organization. So a lot of attention needs to be paid to, who we choose to lead our organizations. And that's why a lot of institutions would be looking towards, having some sort of a look at people who actually lead them. So I'll hold there for now, understanding the context of time while we go on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nero. You touched on a couple of things which I look forward to the panel expanding on the participants. Culture, values, and principles. It is a fact that, as we have seen in many medias globally and otherwise, stakeholders have a concern about, it doesn't matter the quantity of money that they donate or give, but they have a concern about misappropriation, mismanagement, misuse of the funds. So you give funds for X, and the sports administrators find a reason to use it for Y, abuse of credit cards, etc. But in terms of a practical perspective, these are maybe some of the things we would touch on, and I again encourage over 100 participants to feel free to use the question and answer box or the chat box to submit your question. I now invite the mathematician, Ms. Wiggins, to give her take before we move on to the broader topic of the issue of specific issues such as mismanagement and misappropriation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lewis. And mathematician sounds very fancy, but we're all mathematicians when our money doesn't add up. So let's be real about it. I'm just going to bring the perspective more from a realistic and a real world situation, which encompasses everything that was mentioned by my fellow panelists. So in managing a multilateral budget, and those big persons, and drilling it down to a real world practical sense, especially here in the region where checks and balances are not necessarily always what prevails at the higher level. Something very simple happened to me here when I was implementing one of the projects. Each of the organizations I worked with, we would have given them a substantial amount of money, and the IDB would have expected specific recording of simple things as travel expenses, lunches, and those things that we necessarily necessarily take for granted here in the Caribbean. We wouldn't necessarily get receipts, because if you're implementing something and you buy something from the vendor down the road, or your friend gives you a ride, or, you know, you don't necessarily get a receipt to match the money given to you. And some of the persons we would have worked with are not accustomed to those practices. So what happened in the program here was that I had an audit, and I think Mr. Williams spoke to the audits, or was it Mr. Curtis or Nero? And we had a surprise audit. And in a surprise audit, you have to present certain receipts to match spend that was reported. So one of the organizations would have reported that they had lunches up to a certain amount, and they wanted that exact receipt. And the agency wasn't able to produce it because the vendor didn't necessarily give receipts, or it was lost. So what that did was to pause the program, but because we were transparent and had the conversation that it was a local vendor and this wasn't necessarily done, we were able to then work around getting that receipt to match it. But what I'm getting at is, yes, we have these policies at the higher level, and especially when you're getting money from agencies, but then the Caribbean context has to be taken into account, and we have to look from the broader aspect. How can we let our agencies know, and especially in the sporting world that's growing very vastly and very quickly, and we're getting funds that we have to record and report, it's okay to, how do and report your finances affect everyone from the top to the bottom? And that would just be my lead in, and I look forward to others and their input.
So
Thank you very much, Itanya, for that. And if I may ask the panel, the rest of the panelists, to quickly, in their various perspectives, touch base on that very important point about checks and balances, record keeping. As I said, you know, we press for time, but just to bring it on a practical perspective in our context. So
another spin, we think of corruption, and sometimes we focus on persons who may disenfranchise a business. But there's another aspect to it, particularly in sporting organizations. And that is, you have a number of people who use personal funds to support the organization, and it isn't accounted for. And it sometimes distorts, or most of the time it would distort, what is the actual cost of running that particular organization. And you know, and I would encourage persons to, for the purpose of accounting for that, if you use your personal funds to fund an activity, and it's not necessarily refunded, that you record those expenses as expenses of the organization, and the compensating revenue is treated as a donation. That way you capture the expense of the organization. So should you be compared with another organization with a similar activity, it's the activity, you know, and that's a big aspect that is left out in terms of accounting within particularly smaller sporting organizations. The degree to which that I could go ahead and talk about the same aspect relating to volunteers, but I stop. Thank you.
thank you very much for that, Mr. Nero. We'll just, Mr. Joseph, you wanted to say something, and then we'll go quickly to address some of the questions.
I'm all right. No, I'm good.
Okay, so panel, you could jump in terms of answering the questions as they see. So one of the questions we have from Akil Samuel is, financial integrity and transparency is a key factor in business. A part of that is sponsorship and availability. Event a specific sport, but we're talking about an industry and the whole, but the important part is, outside of government, what private organizations can one seek for sponsorship? If I may quickly answer that, Akil, the entire sponsor market and the industry market, you can target specifically. Maybe that is a separate topic in terms of your question. Other question from an anonymous attendee panel is, where can one source the laws with respect to the topic? So,
right, if I
deal
with that quickly as it relates to Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm certain that regionally the laws would be the same, because we follow the same common law legal system out of England. So for example, in terms of, let us say, financial integrity, which speaks about honesty in financial dealings, you look at the money laundering legislation, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Anti-Terrorism Act, the Financial Institution, the Financial Intelligence Unit Act, So all you need to do, let us say, for instance, you Google, say, okay, the laws dealing with financial in right way that speak to access to information from government departments. You have the Freedom of Information Act, you have the Prevention of Corruption Act. The good thing, and I can speak to this regionally as well, is that there are great laws in place. Law. And that is where the whole issue of corruption and the whole issue of bribery and so forth take place, because those who are responsible for ensuring or enforcing the law as it pertains to financial integrity and transparency are some of those persons who themselves involve in corruption and bribery.
I'm going to summarize a couple, but there's a very important question that came up in the question and answer. But there was a comment about giving the speakers more time. While we appreciate that, and we and all agree, we are constrained by time. We may expand to another fifth, but it is a concurrence of CANOC and the TTOC. So to the anonymous attendee who asked about that, we really constrained by time, so we understand that. There was a very important point panel made by, if I may, because it is open, Mr. George Leacock. And he says, my experience suggests that the reality is that most organizations are underfunded. So administrators use their own money. That leads to deliberate or accident commingling of funds. So Mr. Leacock will throw it out to the panel, while I know you have said you can expand. For the purpose of this topic, the reality is commingling is a no-no. But I throw it to the panel to respond to the issue of commingling and if it can be justified.
May I speak to this point as a grant-funded NGO and commingling? And I think Mr. Nero spoke to it, and he's...
Yeah, Brian?
If I put you on the spot, feel free to say so.
No, just tell me what is that again? What is that particular question?
Somebody wanted to find out if Olympic committees are required to publish financial statements publicly. And the person seemed to suggest they believe FIFA and CONCACAF require their federation to do so.
No, it is an individual situation. Olympic solidarity at the level of the IOC and Pan Am solidarity at the level of Pan Am Sports requires you to account for the funding that they give to you. Other than that, they wish to have you apply good practice. And I think they extrapolate from your responsiveness to the funds that they give to you as an indication of how you generally run your operations. And they continue to provide programs for accountability and transparency, and generally they're applying the principles of good governance. But there's no mandate from them for you to do A or B. That is something that essentially national Olympic committees are asked to do within their own constitutions. What has happened recently, though, is that there has been an appeal from several of the international federations, rather than from the IOC itself, that more effort is made to examine the constitutions of the respective national bodies that they have to ensure that they comply with good governance fundamental principles. In that regard, also, we should say that the IOC, that when you do your constitutions as a National Olympic Committee or make revisions to it, that it is sent to the legal department of the extent of, including transparency and accountability with your finances.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Joseph. Folks, we are at 11:59. There's a general agreement that we will go over and continue on for about 15 minutes, because it seems to be overwhelming in man. The questions and answers are really overwhelming. We'll try to record them and answer them, but in a summarized form, there was a question, and this is to the panel, about further seminars. I'm quite sure with all the heavyweight decision makers at CANOC and TTOC on board this seminar and webinar, and seeing the interest, that certainly it will now be on the agenda. There was a question about how do organizations such as clubs and communities, I'm summarizing, start from where they may be at now, which is still kitchen table and card trunk, addressing some of the issues I should have to the panel taken of audit all of these monitoring evaluation things are very expensive, and how do smaller organizations address these issues? Those are just 3 questions summarized that I'm throwing out to the panel. Where do
I
we
don't know if
start?
everybody else
You're not
heard
there.
you, Mr. Lewis, but I just heard the last part where you said 3 questions. I don't know whether the other panelists heard you. I think the internet was going in and out.
I think Brian, we missed a significant portion of what you were synopsizing. But if I glean from what you're saying is that what does an organization that is seeking funding and has not yet, let us say, put the necessary system or structure in place required to do now in an effort to receive funds? To answer that quickly, I suppose the source from which you are seeking the funding, you can start by asking that particular source what they would require. So, for example, I know that where funding from the government, Trinidad and Tobago is concerned, we are supporting organization like a club. Before you can get funds from the government say you need to be incorporated. So you have to be incorporated as an entity. So no longer you could come and say Dave Williams Sporting Club and you're not incorporated. You must have an identity of your own. So that's one criterion that is required. So I think the important thing would be to determine exactly what, let's say, for instance, you want to open a bank account and you are just simply a sporting club. Then you inquire from the bank, okay, what do you require from us in an effort to open an account? I think that's the fastest way to deal with the issue based on the interest that I have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nero, anything to add to that response?
I also sort of picked up that part of the question would have been, where you have financial records that are disorganized, and so how do you start in terms of organizing those records, or where do you start from? And what I would suggest is that as a first instance, that you just do what is called a statement of affairs. That is, you look at what it is that you own and basically what it is that you owe. What you're trying to do is really to develop a statement of financial position that would show you that. And from that, you can actually build, maybe through an accounting program. It was already said early on that you can access those easily on the net. I'm sure you can get some financial help. Even within your organization, there must have been someone who did accounting, even at CXC level to help, or you can seek help that would help put your financial statements together, and you build from there, recording your transactions and so you could even start mid-year. It doesn't have to be at the end of a financial year, and you just build from there. That would allow you the opportunity to organize information that individuals that you're seeking in funding from, if that's the case, would want as a basis for looking at your application. I could speak to Trinidad and Tobago. I know that the Ministry of Sport was offering, I'm not quite sure whether it's at the level of clubs, but certainly you can inquire assistance with regard to that kind of accounting help, even centralizing some of those things. And one of the points really is that, sometimes, and in the long term, this is what we probably have to look at. Everybody tries to do their own little bit, and I'm talking about like clubs and so on. And we really sort of split up and probably duplicating some resources. And maybe one of the things is that we can come together and group for the purpose of having shared resources, and as a result, further our interest and so, because it's difficult. And what you find is that people kind of like work at subsistence level and end up having to really turn the wheel every year, rather than being in a position from which they can take off and grow. So it's something that we can talk about in the future.
Could I just interject, Brian, quickly? I think one of the issues may well be the origins of these organizations, how they get started. It may just be that a group of guys have an interest in playing a particular sport and they practice it. And then when they want to get into something more serious, they realize that you have to form a club. Where do we get the club structure from? Whose experiences and examples are we going to follow, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, media always tell us that education doesn't readily sell. So how do we get to those people who may be thinking that their interest in a particular sport would lead them to want to become involved in a club structure of some sort? Do our organizations all have club structures? I know that some international federations like FIFA, for example, had to put the structure in place for organizations to say, if you're not within a club structure, we're not going to be fund you. International Basketball Federation has done the same. So from my standpoint, one of the critical things is how these organizations become established. What is the rite of passage that they follow? And is there a sort of template that can be provided generally for young people, even through the school system in their physical education and sports curriculum, as to how they get into these things, so that the business of accountability and transparency does not only appear to the matter of the funds that they collect, but the whole structure and framework and value system within which they're expected to operate.
If I may add, I think that maybe for let's say at a club level, the stopping point or the reference point has to be the National Sporting Organization.
Yeah.
So they have to take on that responsibility of providing that guide to a fledgling club that wants to organize itself, because it's the only way. That way you have some sort of standardization even within that particular national sporting organization, because what you would find is that these are the persons or the clubs or organizations from which you will be, well, even drawing players or athletes, I should say, or even future administrators. And if you could standardize how things are done within your own sporting organization, then it makes for easy administration going forward. So if I'm a club within, let's say, track and field, then I would want to go to the NTAs for guidance. Yeah. So
totally agree with that, Mr. Nero. I was totally agree with that.
Okay, so folks, we really can't go past the allotted time. It is obvious that this particular topic has significant interest, and the ball is now in the court of CANOC and the TTOC to look on the way forward. What I will now do is ask the panelists to have their final wrap-up words, and then after that, we will have the vote of thanks from the Secretary General Annette Knott of TTOC. I've been advised that due to the technology issue, the speech of Mr. Emmanuel Medeiros will be shared, and also in terms of the questions and any suggestions and recommendations, that the participants can email the email that you would have used as your contact for registration and further information. So I now invite the panelists to wrap, and out of protocol, if the two presidents present wish to have a final say, greeted, and then we have the vote of thanks from Secretary General and panelists, and then.
Okay, since I started, I'll go first. So I didn't get the opportunity to say what CANOC does, which I was hoping I would in this context of a Caribbean audience, but we'll leave that for next time. But what I will say is that I hope with this very short time, we have been able to impress on our audience the importance of accurate, consistent financial information and encourage a renewed commitment to promoting integrity across your organizations, whether it be in the office or on the field of play. So thanks for having me as a panelist, and I look forward to more of these as we continue to impart information on financial transparency, integrity, and accountability to our counterparts. So thank you.
Right, and seeing that I came after you, I would use one word, and that word is reputation. I think this particular session focused on what is required in order for you to maintain a good reputation. Financial integrity, that is to say, honest in your financial dealings, and transparency. That is to say, be open, be fair, be just in your dealings. And once you abide by those principles, then certainly you would be able to maintain your reputation and be in a position to enhance your organization's effectiveness. Thank you much.
And given the established protocol, I too would. I mean, we just spoke on the topic financial integrity and transparency. You know, at the base of it, and as a simple thing, it speaks to human nature. Really. You're talking about attributes that you expect of just a person in his own personal everyday dealings. I'm a great, I don't know if the word is idealist, but I have a lot of faith in human nature. And the thing is that it's an expectation that persons would behave in a particular way. And I know that there are the exceptions. I don't have my head in the sand, which is why it is so important to choose the right people for your organization. Take some time with regard to choosing your leaders. It's worth the time, because at the end of it, what we're speaking about speaks to just how you would treat your everyday colleagues and the people around you and your community and so on. Because the organization itself is self-sustaining and okay based on the structures that are there. It's just about the people that run them. So let's be good people and let's do the right things and focus on the ultimate, which is the athletes that we support, if you're talking about from a sporting organization point of view. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I know we have a lot more to talk about, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right,
Ms.
thank you.
Wiggins.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nero. It's like you read my final statement, and I really want to say it's not about the quantity, but about the principle and the practices and the people. When we talk about transparency and accounting, I know it's key, but it must be seen in light of our cultural practices that prevail in our region. And we need to bring some of these practices into alignment with the law of the land and the law of the agencies that we're working with, so that we as a people can combat unlawful activity, whether it be deliberate or not. So it's not the quantity, but the principle and the practices. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. So culture, values, principles, and people doing the right thing because it is the right thing to do. President Joseph, you have any parting words?
I just want to say that sport does not exist in a vacuum. We live in society, and no sporting organization ever emerges that is not a reflection of the society in which it has emerged. And so the values of many of our institutions are sometimes an indictment of the society in which we live. Because it's a symbiotic relationship, and people will be as much who they are influenced by as much as who they seek to influence. We see it in every social institution. The fact of the matter is that the point that was being made about being very careful in choosing your leaders. Let's not ignore the fact that people have ambitions. People have reasons for wanting to do things, for reasons for wanting to get into institutions. And sometimes when we get there, we ignore the social responsibility that we have, because these institutions are in fact contributors to the shaping of the very society from which they have emerged. And so the importance of ensuring that there is an ongoing continuous education process, such as this undertaking, is critical to facilitating the continuous development of our respective organizations and the capacity for us to also engage change, because change, one thing that we're sure we will always have is change. Successive generations and their ideas are going to impact these institutions. And those of us who are now the leaders have to ensure that the kind of examples that we set for those who are coming after us, for our successors, allow them to be sufficiently open and transparent in their dealings as well, even when it comes to talking to us, the older ones, about what we have done and what we are seeking to do for those who come after us.
Thank you very much, President Joseph. Culture, a culture of financial integrity and transparency, a culture of financial ethics and good behavior. That is what will build trust. And of course, the responsibility of sporting organizations such as CANOC and the TTOC and NSOs to be best practice examples. If President Henderson is still on, does she have to want some final words? If not, I will invite Secretary General not. So there is Ms. Henderson. So I invite you, and then Secretary General now to give the
Yeah,
vote of
thank you.
thanks. Ms.
Thank
Henderson.
you, Mr. Lewis. Very good, this insightful discussion, and Mr. Joseph said it very clearly. I think that all the information that you seek, the audience, as well as we do as well, has been laid before us, and we can call on this information to guide us as well. Constitutions and everybody has said, alluded to, the different processes and the different areas that need attention. And we would, I can say from now that due to the interest that has been displayed here, that we would definitely continue to address this topic and see how we can assist all our sporting organizations on the way forward. So thank you again for joining, and I leave you with the Secretary General.
It's about good governance. Mrs. Not a good governance advocate. I've never met a more determined good governance advocate in sport.
Thank you very much for your compliments, Mr. Lewis. I'm in the sporting context. I get to blow the final whistle and to say what a quality hour and 19 minutes we've just had. I think that the panel members, every member of the panel in every way has contributed to all of us, that everybody has now had some thoughts, some things to go back on. We're talking about the humanity, about the legalities of how we operate in sport. But most importantly, I think from SIGA's intervention into sport a few years ago, and I have to say, Mr. Lewis's insistent as CANOC president and as a TTOC president to keep involved with SIGA has led us to this morning's panel and seminar in the SIGA week. And we really have to thank all of you panelists for being here, but more importantly, at one point in time, we had 116 participants. And I think that's very important because it means then that people are concerned about finance and good governance. So thank you, everybody. And now 12:20, we're off, and as I said, final whistle blown. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And before you click leave the meeting, folks, remember, send in we'll follow up with the questions as best we could to the email. I don't want to publicly say it, even though you all would have received it in terms of who's the email, where's the email address to send it. But once you registered, you would know. Let me also express significant thanks and appreciation to Lovey Santana and the team at TTOC and Natalia at the CANOC office. Thank you very much.